photography requires a few things. First of all, you need to understand how to work with your light and how to work with a slow shutter speed. These two things are very, very important. You see, you'll be working with a really slow shutter speed in order to create great night photography because we need to leave the shutter open as much as we can in order to let the light in. Often, most people are attracted to night photography because of city night photography. City night shots offer us a wonderful experience in order to practice our photography and become better at it. And not only that, it's great fun. The appeal about city night photography is the beautiful pinpoints of light. We can capture that through building, through traffic, through different types of light in our actual scene itself, like traffic lights, for example. These small pinpoints of light collectively add up to a stunning photograph. So which is the right time to take city night shots? Well, ironically, it's not in the dead of night. It's actually just at dusk. City night photography works beautifully at dusk. If you really want to take beautiful city shots, then just have that beautiful twilight left over in the sky that's from the day. You'll notice that your colours stand out. There'll be just that residual leftover of the colour from the daytime that creates that beautiful orange and pink and blue and sometimes even purple light through your photographs. This is a sky as a backdrop to your beautiful pinpoints of light right throughout your scene creates something stunning. So now let's talk about shutter speed. Shutter speed is predominantly used to capture motion. Motion in your city night photography comes from really the movement of cars and sometimes the movement of things like Ferris wheels or boats across the water and things like that. Those things can really enhance our photography tenfold. So how do we get this streaky light effect? This streaky light effect comes from having light from your subject. Now I know that sounds quite obvious, but it's very important that the light be very predominant within your scene. There's no point capturing a very small pinpoint of light that's moving if it's not going to create a beautiful effect. When you slow your shutter speed down and you get something that's significantly bright moving across your photo at a certain amount of time, you get that timeless effect. You get that time-lapse effect as well. It's very important to be able to get a good sturdy tripod. It's ideal if you shoot on a night without any wind or any movement. When I did some city night photography a while ago, I positioned my tripod on a bridge. And every now and again, a bus would come along the bridge and just ever so slightly, the bridge would move. Now, you wouldn't think that this would affect the photograph, but it actually blurred the photograph completely. It was a great learning experience for me with my night photography. The next vantage point I chose was on solid ground. And you wouldn't think this has an effect, but if you have your shutter open for 30 seconds, for example, any tiny little movement will blur the image. This can be a total waste of your time, so make sure that you choose solid ground and that you don't have any wind moving your camera. Even the slightest movement can blur your image. Even the movement of you pressing down the shutter button can certainly create some kind of minor camera shake. This is why I recommend getting what's called a shutter release cable. A shutter release cable attaches firmly to your camera. Once the lead is snugly inserted into the camera, you'll then be able to take brilliant night shots. As long as you get all the other things right, of course. Basically, at the end of this camera is a small button that allows you to control the shutter without having any movement of the camera at all. It enables you to take and control your photos and control the shutter speed without touching the camera. Make sure you have plenty of slack on the lead and don't pull the lead at all. These cables are pretty inexpensive considering the enormous photographic value that you get out of it. So what about aperture? Aperture is f-stop. This also plays a huge part in your night photography. You see, with aperture, it works a couple of ways. A wide aperture, such as f4 or f2.8, will help to blur the background. Now, this is fine if you want to blur your background, but what if you don't? Usually, night shots or city night photography is taken with the landscape mode, or landscape photography techniques are applied over your night photography. I suggest to use a small aperture. Keep everything as sharp as you can in the distance. In other words, shoot around f16, f18, f22, and even higher if your lens allows it. You have two types of lenses. One is a fast lens and one is a slow lens. With night photography, I recommend using a slow lens. A slow lens has an aperture of around f4. A slow lens and a fast lens, what's the difference? Well, the difference is your shutter speed. The wider the aperture, the faster the shutter speed. The smaller the aperture, the slower the shutter speed. And this, of course, relates to the light. Everything relates to the light. Since you're not going to require a very fast shutter speed with your city night photography, I recommend a slow lens will probably do just fine. So how do we get sharp city night photos? There's nothing more frustrating than getting blurry city night photos. I'm not talking when you want the movement to be blurred, I'm talking about when you don't. So for example, let's say you're standing opposite your beautiful cityscape and the lights are twinkling and you've got beautiful light in the sky and everything's perfect and it all looks as sharp as anything. Then you take the photo and you take it home and you open it up on your computer and you find that it's not as sharp as you would like. So what's the reason for this and what can we do about it? Often the reason is your aperture. Make sure you have a small aperture. The smaller the aperture, the sharper the distance will be. Also, it may be just your camera or your lens. So what can we do about it? Well, we can certainly sharpen in Photoshop. Photoshop has a tool called Smart Sharpen. Smart Sharpen is under the menu, under the filter menu. Once you see this, you can certainly increase the sharpness that your photo has. Or you can open up your photo in Lightroom and you can do the same thing. You can increase the sharpness and you can increase the clarity. The clarity tool simply increases your color sharpness and the sharp tool simply sharpens the photo all over the scene. Sharpening your night photography is a great way to get clearer photos if you don't have the expensive camera gear that professionals have. Everyone deserves to have great photos regardless of their experience or their camera gear. That's my belief. You don't always need a long shutter speed to capture night photography. You see, there have been times when I've photographed the city at night and I've chosen a very long shutter speed such as 30 seconds, but other times I've only chosen maybe a second or 5 seconds. So why is this? You see, the difference is the amount of light in your scene. Just because you're photographing the city at night time doesn't mean you'll be suffering from a lack of lighting. In fact, there are some city night scenes where there is an abundance of light. You can have traffic lights, moving car lights, street lights, lights from the buildings, and even lights from boats on the water. If you're right in the heart of the city, you may find that 30 seconds is just way too much. You can experience what's called light saturation if your shutter speed is open for too long and it lets too much light in. This is different to overexposure, and I'll talk about that in another video another time. Even in some low light conditions, 30 seconds can certainly overexpose a photo as well as increasing the light saturation. So if you're not sure about the shutter speed, I recommend trying the exposure bracketing method. It's where you take 3 photos, one after the other. But the camera does this for you. You can put your camera in continuous shooting mode, then select the exposure bracketing and make sure you have your internal light meter pointing to the middle as your middle photo. You'll know what I mean when you go to do this. You will find that your camera takes 3 photos in continuous shooting mode. In actual fact, some cameras can take more, but I recommend just sticking with 3 for now. The first photo will be underexposed, the second photo will be perfectly exposed, and the third photo will be overexposed. But you know what? This method can actually bring really surprising results. You see, I've done this many times in order to get the right exposure for my photographs. Sometimes I've been really surprised that the photograph was supposedly overexposed. Well, that's what the camera told me. But in actual fact, it gave me perfect exposure. So try this. if you are unsure about what shutter speed is right for the scene. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'll look forward to your company next time. Bye for now.